Afternoon, everyone. It's Kevin here from Clive Owen. Hopefully, this will be coming through to you all right. You'll appreciate this is the first time we've tried to do anything on this software. So please bear with us if there are any technical hitches. Hopefully things will run smoothly. But like I say, the beauty of technology, we're all learning at the minute. So today we're going to cover the changes in the Academy's Accounts Direction and the Academy's Financial Handbook, which come into effect from 1st of September. Chris will be running through the detail of that. One of the key changes this year that you'll be aware of right now is we're having to do this remotely. So it means no cakes at this presentation this year, which I know is always a highlight for people and helps get you through it. But I'm sure Chris will try and make it as entertaining as possible for you without cakes. We then got Mark from Blue Apple Education, who will be talking to you about managing the communication process through COVID-19. Obviously, I'm sure that's been challenging enough as it is, but then obviously with September coming along, hopefully any hints and tips you can get will help along the way. We will be taking questions. If I could ask that everyone, you should see a chat box on your central toolbar. If you could type your questions into the chat box, then what we'll try and do is address those at the end. You can choose whether to send that message either to myself and I'll manage those, or you can share it with everyone in the presentation. But other than that, I'll pass over to Chris now, who will get onto the detail.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a little bit unusual doing it this way. Obviously, I've usually got an audience in front of me. I can actually sort of see your faces. I can see whether you're entertained or not, as the case may be. Unfortunately, there's no tap dancing or anything else like that to entertain you today. So I'm going to be sort of going through, spending the next sort of 40 minutes probably, going through some of the sort of the changes which have come out through the financial handbook, but also sort of looking at a few other bits and pieces, because I'll be perfectly honest, the amount of changes within the Academy's Accounts Direction, the Academy Financial Handbook on their own doesn't probably warrant a sort of full session. So what I'm going to try and do is go through the sort of the growth in the sector, some of the findings from the ESFA around the 31st of August 2019 audit. So this is actually what the departments are actually saying about the year-end financial statements, before then going on to the Accounts Direction and the Academy's Financial Handbook. I'm going to do literally about 90 seconds on LGPS, just because people ask why are the valuations in the accounts very different to the valuations which are included within the triennial valuation. And then I'll just go very, very quickly go through a few other issues which people have asked us about over the last few months, just to sort of highlight those generally. So I'm going to start with a very quick slide on sort of growth in the sector and really sort of take you back to sort of Tony Blair's days and the fact of him introducing sort of academies back in 2002. At that point in time, it was failing schools that were converted. Then you had the coalition government coming into play, and at that point, they sort of obviously wanted outstanding schools to convert, and sort of that was when sort of things took off, especially with the freedoms that were given and the additional cash that was available in 2011. And then over the next few years, down to 2015, sort of things have sort of slowly sort of trailed off as those initial schools that wanted to convert did so. 2015 is a bit of a low point because of election purdah in that year. And then we had a sort of an increase again. 2017 was the white paper. And obviously, again, that was a question of all schools were then expected to become academies, and therefore there was another bit of a push before that sort of started to slowly drop down again in 2018, with sort of coasting schools no longer to be required to actually convert and become academies. Obviously 2019 we had further yet again, and 2020, well, I don't need to tell you what's really sort of happened within this year. So how does that sort of look in terms of size of multi-academy trusts. Well, if we look at the 2 different years, and I've just tried to pick up April 16 and April 2020, because April 20 is probably about the last time there's some sort of reasonable results there. Back in April 2016, there's about 80% of multi-academy trusts, I've excluded the stats here, which had 2 to 5 schools, and then sort of 14%, 6 to 10, 4%, 11 to 20, and 21 was 2%. That number's changed fairly dramatically. I mean, obviously, you've got about 900 schools on average converting every year, and the number of stats has gone down. There are still some stats being approved, but very few, and similarly, very few empty mats being approved. So what we've got now is really sort of the emergence of those larger multi-academy trusts coming through. So what's happening now is the number, which are 2 to 5, has reduced to 63%. You've then got a fairly substantial growth actually in that sort of next cluster of those sort of 6 to 10. And what might sort of surprise people is that small cluster there, that 4% of, which is 21% of trusts that are actually out there, actually include 15% of all academies. So that's some fairly sort of, which gives you an idea of the actual size of those academies coming through. So picking up on the sort of the department's sort of findings then from their sort of annual review, whereby they actually sort of publish and actually let us know what's actually happening. What you can see here again is a sort of reflection of the fact that the number of financial statements that were due to the department over the last 3 years has slowly declined from 3,054 to 2,865. Those submitted on time has actually increased over that time from 93.7% to 97.9%, so a fairly significant increase. The number that were late this year was 61 sets of accounts, and they were late for a number of reasons. And as for probably about 3 weeks ago, there were about 18 that still hadn't submitted. So obviously there are some fairly significant issues there. And each year the ESFA don't receive all of the trust sets of accounts that they expect, because some of those trusts have ceased to be, because the schools within them have transferred elsewhere. So looking at their findings, and this is some information that was published 3 or 4 weeks ago. On the true and fair view, that the majority were unqualified, so 98.5% were unqualified. Obviously, the expectation is with some of that 18 which have not submitted, some of those will be qualified, so that number will probably reduce in due course. And qualifications in 2019 were similar to 2018, so around land and buildings and the valuation thereof, not helped in part by the fact of the ESFA now obviously provide you with information about what the value of land and buildings is, but unfortunately after the submission date for the year-end accounts. Local government pension scheme valuations, especially on transfers in, transfers out, not being obtained, or question marks over the validity of some of those. And then inadequate accounting records, and the fact that the records aren't really sort of a good enough base for the accounts to be sort of constructed from. And then in respect of the auditor's regularity, 7% last year were modified. Again, that number will probably increase as those other 18 accounts come through. And what we're looking at here is control weaknesses. So systems not really working as they were expected to work. Internal financial reporting. So management accounts not being done on time, not being provided to the accounting officer or the chair of the trust board on a monthly basis, potentially not including balance sheets or cash flow forecasts. So a range of different things there. No independent checks of controls. This is really sort of the internal audit, internal assurance. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a few minutes' time. And then procurement and tendering tends to be one that does catch people out, especially where there's overdue limits around. So just a reminder that when we're talking about sort of contracts, especially for overdue, you're looking at the lifetime of the contract. So if it's a 4-year contract and it's £50,000 a year, then that's a £200,000 contract. It's that £200,000 that you should be comparing against the overdue thresholds. And then last but not least, Alcohol, I think we could all do with a glass or two at the moment, without the way everything is. And I think, judging by the wheelie bins where I live, I think that's definitely been enforced as well by some of my colleagues who live around me. But alcohol is something that gets mentioned on a yearly basis, and again, we'll come back and see that there's an issue with that again this year as well. Management findings. These are the management letters. So when we actually produce the year-end accounts for you, we also produce a management pack. And again, the department have actually summarised these. And the average number of recommendations has reduced slightly in 2019 compared to the previous year. So it's come down slightly, but only slightly. It does talk about 420 trusts reporting at least one high-value risk. Well, if you think that actually there's about 2,800 trusts, that starts to put into context the number of academy trusts out there which do have some red issues, which are basically being raised on a yearly basis, possibly about 15% on the basis of that calculation. So that's something that is worrying the department, and something they are putting some particular focus in. They also have some concern around the number of management letters which do not have any recommendations at all. And I know, speaking to some of my colleagues around the country, they do not recognise a number of 19.8% of management letters being completely clean as being realistic, given that if we do actually lift up the bonnet, there's usually something to report on somewhere, just because of the very nature of the organisations we've got here. I mean, you are very complex beasts. Not only have you got the Companies Act requirements, as a normal sort of say engineering company would have, you've then got all the charity regulations, which obviously a charity would have. Before then, you actually add on all the other recommendations and procedures and sort of directions and the like, which the department bring out for yourselves. So the next thing, again, is something that's worrying the department, is that actually when they've gone through all those 2,800 reports, there's actually 1,000 recommendations across those trusts, which have been carried forward from one year to the next. And what they're saying there is, actually, are people taking these recommendations seriously and actually dealing with them and actually ensuring they're actually actioned, especially when 180 of those were actually classified as red. So again, significant number of red transactions moving on from one year to the next. And this is where the ESFA are actually talking about, and actually have already put in place, a sort of team to actually focus on those trusts whereby recommendations are being carried forward from one year to the next. And obviously the idea is that they'll actually investigate those or potentially visit those in due course, which have transactions which are causing them an issue because actually they're not being moved on appropriately on a year-by-year basis. So, moving on then, the Academies Accounts Direction. As I say, there's not masses in here, but it's probably one of those things whereby you just need to be aware of some of the changes and whether they do impact on yourself or not. Because some of the trustee report requirements, the success of the company, the business relationship, and the energy and carbon reporting only apply to large companies. And what I mean by large, and I give that sort of the definition below, is where the turnover of the entity is more than £36 million. And as I say in there, the definition is important because where you've got new schools joining you and you've been donated land and buildings, that actually is included in turnover. If you've been lucky enough to have the department build you a new building for the school, then again, that is also included because it's included as a donation. So there are a number of things which could spike the turnover unduly. Assets at £18 million, it is purely that assets. So again, we're looking here at land and buildings, stock, and cash at bank, and any monies that are owed to you by sort of third parties. So we're not taking any account here of LGPS liabilities. We're not taking into account PAYE liabilities. It is purely assets, and then the employee count of 250. And what the large company test comes down to is if you actually breach 2 out of 3 of those for 2 years, consecutive 2 years, then you are caught in what's called a large company. So it could be that you're over the turnover and the employee threshold in 1 year and the asset and the employee threshold in the next year, in which case you would be caught out. you would be caught by this. The 2-year test isn't really sort of flagged up by the department in the accounts direction, but if you follow the guidance through, you can find out a bit more about it there. The employee engagement one is actually just aimed at those which have got 250 employees or more. So you don't have to basically breach the large company thresholds. If you've got 250 employees or more, then you are caught. So what is the success of a company, and what do you have to include within the trustees report? Well, it's about promoting the success of the charity to achieve its charitable purposes. So you've got to have regard to employees, business relationships, the consequences of decisions in the long term, impact on the community and the environment, maintaining high standards, and the need to act fairly between members. So realistically, it's those first two, probably interest to employees and business relationships, which are being pulled out as particular examples, because obviously they're the next two on the slide, as you can see. So in respect of employee engagement, this is a little bit more detailed, this one, and we'll probably add a little bit to the trustees report because it's talking about what have you done to provide employees with information on matters of concern to them. So if you're doing sort of some restructuring or you're changing the curriculum, what have you actually done to make sure that they're involved? And that then sort of leads into regular consultation with employees or their representatives. It doesn't have to necessarily be the employees, it could be their representatives, to ensure that their voice is heard on matters affecting them. It encourages employee involvement in the company performance. Well, I think that's probably one of those things where it's fairly easy to sort of say how the employees are involved in the company performance, given Academy Trusts and the teaching staff are obviously there for that purpose. Needs to ensure employees are aware of factors that affect the performance of the trust. I mean, obviously they'll be aware of things like exam results, but what about the number of pupils and the impact that that has on the income of the Academy Trust? Is that something they should be aware of? Interesting question, something for you to have a think about. And also the treatment of applications from disabled persons, the treatment of employees who became disabled, and training, career development and promotion of disabled people. So as I say, there's a fair bit extra in there to potentially disclose within your year-end financial statements within the trustees report. And then business relationships, that one's a lot simpler, thankfully. That's really looking at the business relationships with suppliers and customers. And the customers really is talking about these sort of pupils here. Others, what would they be? Well, potentially it might be businesses which your students are using. So think about things like school uniform. It may be something that you're not buying and actually selling on to your pupils, but you're recommending they use sort of a certain sort of supplier in town. Again, art supplies and the like. And it's a question of what relationship have you got there and possibly mentioning something about them. It's also sort of, there's a slight tweak to the governance statement. So where you have actually sort of looked at the governance handbook and the competency framework, they're asking you really to sort of say that that's what you've done. So really it's just adding a few extra words into that governance statement. The ethics standards, this is something that Kevin and I have been discussing with you over the last few weeks, or if we haven't already had the meetings, we'll be having the meetings shortly. Because in some instances, we act as the external auditors and the internal auditors to the Academy Trust. And what the new Academies Financial Handbook has actually brought in is an expectation that actually that ceases as of the 1st of September. So from the 1st of September onwards, external and internal audit have to be done by separate providers. And I'll come back to that in a bit more detail in a few minutes' time. Regularity report. This really goes back to what I was saying earlier on in the fact that some trusts, all the schools transfer into another multi-academy trust, and therefore the accounts, the final set of accounts are never submitted to the department. And they're obviously not overly happy with that sort of situation. So what they're saying is an accounting officer must be retained around until the closure of the trust. So it's not just the passing on of those schools to another trust, but actually, if you're actually closing down that trust, the accounting officer must be around. Now, in certain instances, I appreciate that's not going to be that easy to do because obviously the accounting officer may well be moving on elsewhere, in which case it might be that the accounting officer for the multi-academy trust becomes the accounting officer for a short time of that trust that's being wound up, where the schools were originally from. But obviously, if they do so, then they need to be given some assurance by the outgoing accounting officer that everything is correct, which is why on a yearly basis we do these accounting officer checklists, which we encourage basically the accounting officer to complete to make sure that they have got something to sort of show somebody if when they're signing that document. There's also a bit about irregularity, impropriety and non-compliance and just stating the amount. So if there is a procurement issue or there's been alcohol bought, then you're actually sort of stating the amount of the procurement that's gone wrong or the amount of alcohol that's been bought. You're actually sort of putting it in the report. And similarly, the next bullet point down is saying that where we've got non-compliance, then actually we should be stating exactly the same. And as I think everybody's probably realised along the years with ourselves, what we try and do is make sure that if there is a regularity breach, that actually the accounting officer report and our own match each other, because that's obviously what would be expected going forward. Notes to the accounts, legal costs to be disclosed in the note. These are basically costs associated with conversion or incorporation of a new academy or with educational operations. It's really where an opinion is being sought from a legal professional. Changes in net debt to be disclosed. I'll be perfectly honest, this is going to have very little impact on many of the trusts. And it's usually there in, say, an engineering company because actually they've got to disclose overdrafts, hire purchase agreements, bank loans, but all of those you're not allowed to sort of undertake. So really the only debt which we should probably come across is Salex loans and potentially loans on conversion. So it may be the trust you've taken on a school which is in difficulty, financial difficulty that is, and actually you've agreed with the ESFA that you're going to repay some of that money back to the local authority via the department. Examples of funding where there are zero balances. This is just picking up on one or two situations where the department would just like a bit more clarity about what's happening within the accounts, because some trusts now, multi-academy trusts, what they do at the end of each year is they effectively transfer all the balances for the individual schools into a central trust balance. So it's zero balances for every single school. And what the department want is some sort of guidance to actually sort of say, that's actually what you've done in the accounts and actually sort of you to specify. And then really lastly on there, updated teachers pension scheme notes. Why they didn't do this last year, I don't know, but they didn't do it last year, so they've updated it this year. And then other things, if there's ever been a transfer of activities into a wholly owned subsidiary, I'll be perfectly honest, I'd hope that we're actually involved in discussing those with you in a fair bit more detail around sort of corporation tax and VAT issues and the like, because they'll probably come more to the fore than just what's going to come in the year-end accounts. And then subsidiaries, not material, don't need to be consolidated, but what the department's realised is in a few instances, there are a number of subsidiaries out there for some trusts. And actually, if you add those trusts together, you actually do get something that is material. And if you ever want to think about what the materiality number is, then on a yearly basis, we have that discussion with you, and it's part of the planning documentation where we talk about materiality. So if you ever want to look at that, that's where we're at. And then helpfully, the ESFA have actually brought out a checklist to help you prepare for the external audit. What I would say is we've got our own wish list, so please use that where you can, because obviously that's the information we need. What I would say is that checklist or wish list will be out to you shortly. I apologise it's not come out before, but what we understand is that there will be a further Academies accounts direction, or possibly they may call it a bulletin in respect of COVID. So this is disclosures or additional disclosures that you'll need to make within the trustees report, and also the notes to the accounts about how any additional income has been shown and on what the impact of the expenditure has been on the trust. But as I say, that document was due out, we thought by the end of, well, we were told by the end of June, early July. Obviously, we're on the 13th of July now, so time is moving on. So we are going to get those checklists out. And apologies, we will therefore have to send out sort of a second checklist once we find out some more details around what is happening with that. Oops, seem to have slipped on a slide. Just bear with me a second while I try and work out how to get back a couple of slides. And another, that's it, thank you. Right, the energy and carbon reporting. This is the big change, and as I say, it only applies to large companies. So again, I've sort of listed out the details at the bottom of the page there again about what a large entity is. The department have said, and the guidance does say it's not mandatory for smaller entities, but it's encouraged. How encouraged you are, I'll leave you to decide over the next few minutes. It does, as it says at the top of the slide, only apply to large companies and those consuming over 40,000 kilowatts of energy per year. Having had discussing this the other day with a consultant who specialises in energy and carbon reporting, I said, well, what would you think 40,000 kilowatts an hour, would that be sort of 3 or 4 primary schools, a couple of secondary schools? And he came back and said, realistically, that's probably a large primary school. So if you're a large company and turning over more than 36 million, having more assets than 18 million employees over 250, I suspect the likelihood is that you are not a sort of larger than normal sort of primary school, and therefore you'll be caught by these regulations. So what do you need to include within these calculations? Gas, it talks about stationary or mobile devices. Mobile devices, I'll be perfectly honest, as some of you probably realise, I've got some grey hair over the years. So if I go back 30 odd years, I can think of heaters in some of the rooms which had gas bottles in, and they were used to sort of keep us warm at that point. But other than that, I'm not entirely sure what mobile gas sort of items or devices you'd actually have. But you may well be in a better, you will be in a better position to tell me than me. Electricity, transport fuel. So this is looking at the staff reimbursement and minibus fuel. And again, if there's any sort of energy or gas being used by a subsidiary, then that also needs to be disclosed. Put in there a link to an example at the bottom, and these slides, if they've not already come out, will be coming out to you very shortly. So you can actually sort of click through to that link. So what do you need to disclose in the accounts? Well, you need to disclose the annual UK energy use. So this is kilowatt hours. And the guidance does say there's an option to break this down between electricity, gas, and transport fuel. I'll leave you to work out whether you've got the information. Well, you will have the information to do it, whether you want to do it or not. Greenhouse gas, the GHG emissions. This is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then there's an emissions intensity ratio. This is there to enable you to sort of, well, what you're going to do is actually pick a factor that you're going to compare the emissions to, a business or financial indicator, which enables you to compare things year on year and against other organisations. And what the ESFA have actually come out here and asked for is tonnes per pupil to be used. And in particular, they've asked the number of pupils to be based on the autumn census. Methodologies that can be used, apparently there are several, and I must admit this is new to me, so I hadn't realised there was a number of different ways of actually calculating this, but apparently there is. And it is very well worthwhile clicking through on that link that I've put on the slide there to actually sort of see how the calculations can be done, because actually what the department is saying within their guidance is you should be able to do these calculations rather than paying for somebody third party to come in and do them for you. I do think, though, it's not a 5-minute exercise because there is a fair bit of information to pull together. So the methodology that's included in the guidance is the GHG reporting protocol. Bit of a mouthful, that. And it's split into different scopes. So scope 1 is direct, so that's emissions from combustion in owned or controlled boilers and vehicles. In effect, there you've actually got to report gas and fuel for transport as 2 separate items under that scope. Scope 2 is energy indirect. So that's own consumption of purchased electricity, heat, steam, and cooling sources not owned or controlled by the trust. So in effect, you're disclosing the electricity. And scope 3 is other indirect. So that's for business travel in private cars. So basically what you're reporting there is the emissions from private cars where the trust pays the fuel, e.g. mileage. One thing I should have mentioned at the beginning of this is in the first year, you do not need to go back and calculate the comparative. So you do not, for the year ended 31st of August 2020, need to go back and actually recalculate what all these disclosures would have been at the 31st of August, or in the year ended 31st of August 2019. However, if because you're not a large company now, but next year you become a large company, then when you do your August 2021 accounts, you will need comparatives for 20. So it's a 1 year sort of relaxation of the rules for yourselves. So just to sort of bear that in mind. And then moving on to the Academies Financial Handbook, what I try to do here is just sort of pull these into sort of some sort of subsets. So there's a bit here about sort of governance, and obviously the Academies Financial Handbook, these are the rules and regulations coming in with effect from the 1st of September 2020. So it's not the ones you should have been following for this year, it's ones that you will follow for next year. So the first one there is trustees responsible for ensuring a going concern. And what the department are worried about here is there's been a few instances whereby the trustees have not challenged the executive strongly enough around why the financial performance continues to go backwards and why have they got into a cumulative deficit situation and why are they not making cuts around X, Y, and Z. So it's really sort of trying to make sure that the trustees are actually responsible and know they are responsible for ensuring that the organisation is a going concern. Talks about members must not be employees or occupy unpaid staff roles. That one's sort of slight oddity in this handbook. In fact, that one doesn't come into effect until the 1st of March 2021. And then it talks about members must remain informed about trust business. What we're talking about here is obviously the members on a yearly basis do get to see the accounts, they get them at the AGM, but there's an expectation that the members challenge the trustees, and then the trustees challenge the exec. And obviously, if the members are just meeting literally for 5 minutes, talking about the accounts, and then sort of don't ask any questions of the trustees, then the comment from the department is, are the members doing or performing their role correctly in actually making sure that they are actually challenging the trust members about what they're doing and how they're actually holding the executive to account. So something to bear in mind. Trust must appoint a clerk to the board. There can't be a trustee, can't be the principal, can't be the or the CEO. And this is really just a question of professionalising the board minutes. I'll be perfectly honest, I can't think of any of our clients that don't already have a clerk to the board of some description or other that actually pulls together reasonably comprehensive minutes. And then clarifying that trusts must keep their register of interests up to date. I know a lot of you do this on an annual basis, but what this is really trying to push at is making sure that that register of interest is kept up to date throughout the year. And what I've suggested to a number of clients over the year is when you're asking about declarations of interest at a meeting, is there any declarations of interest for this meeting? Question 1. Question 2, does anybody's declarations of interest need updating? And it's that second point which tends to get missed off. And especially given the related party transaction rules now that are in place, it is important that those registers of interest are kept up to date to effectively prevent any regularity issues occurring. So moving on to the executive team, confirmation that the accounting officer and the chief financial officer should be employees, and where they are not, there must be ESFA approval provided for those. And in the larger trusts, it's encouraging those trusts to sort of consider accountancy qualifications for those people that are the sort of the chief financial officer. And it also talks about making sure that the continued professional development is actually kept up to date. Well, obviously today is continued professional development, so that qualifies you on that respect. So general controls and transparency, fixed asset registers, most of you keep those up to date. Termly review of pupil number for projections is something that's being pushed again by the department, because what they've seen is a few examples whereby people have produced budgets based on certain numbers sort of about now, and then realistically sort of later on in the year when they're starting to see projections for what's going to happen in the next financial year, they're not really updating them quickly enough. So just a question of just making sure that there's no major changes in pupil numbers, especially if you've got those smaller schools there. But if you have got a smaller school, you probably know what's going on in any case. Integrated curriculum financial planning, obviously the department encourages the use of that. And then the avoidance of overdrafts. This is something whereby there's been a few cases whereby trusts have had multiple bank accounts and monies need to move around between accounts. And just human error, human timing, monies haven't always moved around at the appropriate time, and therefore an account's gone overdrawn. Bank have been reasonably relaxed about it because obviously they've got significant assets in another account. But what the department are saying is that shouldn't happen, so it's one to watch and make sure it doesn't. And then publishing on your website of the number of employees earning over 100,000 in £10,000 bandings. Really sort of an extract from the financial statements. That £100,000 must include salary, benefits and termination payments, but not the employer's pension contribution. But it's something that's additional required to be sort of published on the website. And then whistleblowing procedures was something that came out last year. Now it's a question of getting those whistleblowing procedures on the trust website rather than actually them sort of just being something that's on the staff notice board somewhere. Alcohol, hopefully this will be the last year I mention alcohol. And what they've clarified now is it cannot be purchased except for religious services. So where you got communion wine, that's fine. Otherwise, the expectation is that the trust will not buy it out of any sources of money which they actually hold. Does mean in certain instances you probably need to get the PTAs a little bit more active to actually undertake certain things on your behalf and then actually pay monies across at the end of some sort of fundraising event rather than actually the school potentially be involved in actually making some of the purchases for that fundraising event. Completion of the SRMA is now something that's actually included within the handbook. So that's another one where I suspect there'll be a black mark against your name if you don't complete it on time. And then the risk management and the trustees are responsible for the risk register. This is something that Lord Agnew, before he sort of wasn't no longer the minister, was really sort of pushing this internal scrutiny, this internal audit idea. And what he was saying is, it's the trust board as a whole must review the risk register on an annual basis. They can actually sort of ask the audit and risk committee or finance and audit committee or whatever you want to call it to actually review it on a sort of at least a termly basis. But when they're reviewing it, they must look at financial and non-financial controls. So they must look at Ofsted visits and potentially going wrong and what the implications being. Have you got things like asbestos in the building? What are you doing to control that? As well as sort of the financial sort of aspects as well. And it's something that Lord Agnew was particularly keen upon. And what he's looking for here is for that audit and risk committee to become more involved in actually deciding what work should actually be done. So actually taking the risk register, looking at it, seeing what the risks are, looking at the controls, and then saying, how do we actually test that that control is actually working as it should be? And there's nothing that's going to come back to bite us here if that control fails. And that may involve sort of using a firm of auditors to actually come in and actually undertake that work. It might be, if it's something like asbestos, getting a third party in to actually come and actually support that internal scrutiny. So don't just think, when you think of internal assurance and scrutiny, don't just think about it as it's always got to be sort of financial. It can be around sort of other bits and pieces as well outside of that. Probably say significant other things as well. Because, as I mentioned earlier, internal and external audit can no longer be done by the same firm. The number of or the options that are available to you have sort of narrowed by one. So now your options for this internal audit, internal scrutiny, is to employ an in-house auditor yourself. I've got one client that does it very effectively. They look after not only their own trust, but actually they also sell that time and service out to other trusts around their locality. Internal audit. So this is using another firm to actually come in and actually to undertake that work for you. There's an appointment of a non-employed trustee and peer-to-peer review, or a mixture of any of those four. So it's something that need to be sort of a think about as a trust board. And then the last thing on there was something that came in last year, but was very much below the radar, in that there is an expectation now from the department that census data will be up there as something that can be checked on a regular basis, and also sort of funding claims, both revenue and capital. So it may well be the sort of census data, because actually obviously that links into the GAG funding, but it could also be around pupil premium and have you actually got the right people on the right forms. And therefore, and then for capital, we're talking there about sort of SIF monies or SCA monies. So it's something extra sort of to consider about where you're getting monies from the department. How are you satisfying the department that you've actually got robust controls in place to make sure you're not overclaiming? On the other hand, how do you know if you're not underclaiming as well? And then last but not least, for the Audit and Risk Committee, obviously we're sharing with you now an external auditor's plan, and we're going through that plan and with the sort of the executive. That needs sharing with the Audit and Risk Committee to make sure that they understand what we see as the risk areas, and if there are other risk areas that they want us to have a look at, then for them to come back to us. And then at the end, when we come out and see the Audit and Risk Committee, then we go through the annual financial statements at that point, and also the auditor's findings report. And what the department are really sort of pushing for here is, are the trustees actually challenging the executive's feedback in the audit findings report? Because as you'll remember, in the audit findings report, we come up with various control issues. And in the right-hand column, you then say how you're going to fix those control issues. And what it's saying is there's an expectation from that the trustees will actually sort of challenge the exec to make sure that those things are being done at an appropriate time, and the action that's being put forward is actually appropriate as well. A lot of you do that already, but it's just that it's something now that's being picked up and specifically commented upon. Accounts deadline, 31st December 2020. Well, given what's happened in the fact of you've lost one return, as I'll mention in a few minutes' time, another return has been put back significantly. There was some expectation within the sector that the accounts deadline would be put back. I was at a meeting with the department on the 9th of June where this was being discussed, and the feedback was that they'd come back out to us within 2 to 3 weeks. Well, the 9th of June to the 13th of July is a bit longer than 2 or 3 weeks. So the fact that we haven't heard anything at the moment is, well, I suspect we're not going to get any change to the accounting deadline. I think it might, if anything, be by exception. So if a certain trust can't do something by the 31st of December, then there may be a way of applying to the department to actually get an extension. But I think the expectation will be that as a sector, most of the accounts will be submitted by the 31st of December rather than getting the extension. Right, I did say I would briefly touch on, oops, I don't know what's happened there, on LGPS valuations. Just because one or two people ask why they're different. It's really because they're done on different basis. One's done on membership data, other one's done on estimated projections, one's done on a very prudent basis, the other one's done on best estimates. The assumptions set by the LGPS in the case of triennial, in theory set by the directors on the FRS 102. I wouldn't panic about that one too much because usually the actuary stroke local authority provides some guidance about what assumptions should be used. Our advice usually is use those assumptions, because otherwise, A, it's going to cost you more, and B, unless you've actually got somebody who actually knows more than an actuary about the actuarial assumptions, somebody could question why you've sort of moved away from that. So that really sort of leads into, under the two methodologies, the assets are usually about the same value. What we tend to find is that the liabilities are different between the two. and that's just really because you're looking at past service costs on one, while the other one's looking more forward as on. And in respect of what's going to change or how things change, because some of you will be used to the fact of, well, especially last year, I think the discount rate moved by about 0.9, and in some cases, people, when you had to look at the actuarial valuation, 0.1 of a movement moved things by in excess of £100,000. So obviously 0.9 would actually move things by £1 million plus in some cases. So discount rate, as discount rate moves, that's where you get the yo-yo. Salary increases and other demographic issues don't really sort of feature quite as much. It's that discount rate, which is the main thing year on year, which gets you up and down. And as you'll possibly appreciate at the moment, bond rates are not particularly great given the situation we're in. So I've whizzed through things reasonably quickly, and I'm just going to quickly touch upon some other sort of issues. Budget setting, just a sort of, obviously, national funding formula was a sort of thought that we might have a bit more detail by now, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Teachers' pay and pension grants being rolled into national funding formula. Don't have a lot of information on that yet and how it's going to work through. The 2.75% pay offer for support staff was sort of rejected by the unions. My understanding at the moment is that all bar one of the unions have now said that actually they're going to accept that, and the one that hasn't has really sort of left it to the members to decide whether they're going to accept that or not. Teachers' pay recommendations, another one that seems to have gone very, very quiet. And what I've put on the screen there is really sort of something that I was at a seminar recently where the representative from the ISBL was there, and he was involved in a couple of trusts. And this was what he was actually sort of looking at doing, was actually going for the option B, which seems to speaking to a number of you be where you are as well, and looking to move from sort of £26,000 in September this year through to £30,000 in September 22, which is the Secretary of State's preferred option on there. Impact of COVID, are you going to be additional costs? Are you going to recover any money? Don't know. Exam fees, I'm hearing some rumours that one exam board is looking to refund 23% of the exam fees, but I've not seen anything in writing yet, and I don't know whether that's a position that's being taken across all exam boards or whether that's just one. One would like to think that they've actually spoken to each other and agreed something between them, but that may or may not be the case. And obviously, if there is an autumn sitting, who's going to pay for those exams in the autumn, especially if those students have potentially left you and gone on to some other establishment? I've not actually seen any guidance on that yet, but presume there will be some shortly. And then things like transport. Is it going to cost you any more? Because you've actually got to think about sort of those bubbles and which year groups and is using which transport, and have you got a bubble for transport and a bubble for year groups, and do they overlap? And it'll be interesting to see how that one works through. I was speaking to somebody the other day, and the local college near him had actually assigned year groups as bubbles. Well, the year groups at the college are, well, in that case, were well in excess of 1,000 pupils per bubble, which is actually bigger than the school I was actually talking to that principal about. So it's going to be interesting about the bubble sizes and how they differ, I think, between various organisations, unless I've missed some of the guidance that's come out. But as you'll appreciate, the guidance that you've been getting has been coming out at a fairly significant rate. I think it appears to have been at least about one piece of email coming out per day. And sometimes what seems to have come out in the morning by the afternoon seems to have changed yet again. So it's been definitely a trying time, shall we say, to keep up with all the regulations. And then there's things like sort of catch-up funding and how that's going to work going forward. So I thought I'd sort of put that up there about some of the budget setting issues you might have. And then there's a couple of slides here on what I call behavioural nudges. And as you may have seen over the last sort of few months or a couple of years even, there's been a move towards points being awarded or deducted for certain sort of funding streams that you're going after. So in this particular case, it's SIF funding and excessive executive pay, points deductions. If you've had an SRMA visit and you've not made any progress, again, points deductions, and agreeing to a visit is a condition. I'm sure a number of you were not impressed when that came in sort of 18 months ago and saw that your next chunk of money that was due in they were saying, can we have an SRMA visit, please, as part of this? There was a lot of kickback on that one to the department because it came out very, very late. Financial viability and governance concerns, between 1 and 4 points deducted, but then you can actually get a bonus point if you've got a more recent funding agreement, which I understand to be sort of post December 14. And then TCAF, again, similar. There are points deductions here to be had. Some of them are fairly easy to sort out. So updating trust details throughout the year. That's something that obviously, if you do it on a regular basis, you shouldn't have a points deduction. Internal audit reports, again, if those are actually being dealt with appropriately, then there shouldn't be any issues there. And then last slide. So hopefully, Mark, you can wake up now because you'll be on in a minute. But really, the sort of the budget forecast return, the BFR, as you'll be aware, the deadline's been extended by a couple of months to the 29th of September. To use the department's phraseology, the forecast for 21-22 and 22-23 have been paused. What I would remind you of there is that when we're undertaking the audit and we're signing off the accounts, we're talking about 12 months from the date of signing the accounts. So with a lot of you will be signing the accounts in December of this year. Therefore, we'll at least need financial forecasts through to December 21. Having said that, all the school visits I've done to date, I think everybody was a fair way through the 3-year forecasts before we actually got to the position of this being sort of announced. So I think most schools are actually finishing off doing the 3 years, even if years 2 and 3 are not possibly done as polished as they have been done in previous. And the other thing to mention is the summary document when you do submit the BFR is significantly shorter. And then last but not least, the school's resource management self-assessment tool. Deadline last year was November. Ourselves and 1 or 2 other firms made some comments at one of the regular Auditors Forum meeting that I attend down in London on a sort of bi-monthly basis. And we said, was that really the best time to put that out when you've also got the land and buildings return, but also the external audit going on? And given that a significant amount of the information in there is actually useful for the budget setting, because it's looking at sort of benchmarking data, would it not be better to sort of move that back a bit into March? So that's what the department have eventually done. I've put wish lists on there. I mentioned earlier, apologies, they're coming out slightly later than anticipated, but we're still waiting on the accounts direction. I know Kevin, after last year, was monitoring the websites for any sort of releases at all this morning, because as a number of you may remember, last year we actually got the updated guidance for the Academies Financial Handbook at literally sort of 8 o'clock in the morning when we were doing our first presentation at I think 9:30 that morning. So we had to do a bit of a quick update of slides and everything else. So Kevin did an excellent job of being able to give people something that was very, very live at that point in time. Right, so that's pictures of Kevin and I, so you can see more than just my headshot there. Hopefully you found that useful. What I would say is it's a bit unusual sitting here speaking, where effectively I'm speaking to a monitor, so it's a bit odd. So as I say, hopefully you found it useful. If anybody's got any questions in due course, then obviously please fire them through to Kevin and myself, either on the chat, or if you want to on email, and we'll get back to you on those. But otherwise, I'm now going to try and hand over to Mark, and hopefully everything will go swimmingly on that side. So thank you very much for your time.
The wonders of modern technology. Okay, hello everybody. I hope you can all hear me and see me. Lots of familiar names there that I can see in the participants list, and some of you may recognise me from the seminar that we gave in February. And you might recall that I was chatting there about school branding and getting control of school branding and communications. And the guys have invited me back this afternoon, basically because lots has changed since February. It's a very different world that we're living in, and obviously we wanted to update with you all. I got lots and lots of questions and feedback from that event, and I've managed to meet up and chat with lots of you and answer lots of those questions that you had. So same again today, really. Hopefully we'll pose some questions. There'll be questions that you want to ask. by all means, drop those into the chat towards the end of the presentation. We'll try and answer them, and I'll stick around at the end as well and answer any questions that you've got. And obviously, there's always an opportunity to reach out to me following today's talk if you've got specific questions about your trust or any of your schools, and we'll see how we can help. So today, talking specifically about school communications, but also some lessons that we can learn from school communications during COVID, and communications that I've seen from all of the different schools that I deal with over that period. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm going to chat you through, this is basically an overview of what we're going to look at this afternoon. I'll tell you a little about who we are and who I am, so that you know why I have some experience and why I'm qualified to talk on this topic. And then, as I say, specifically looking at that role of communications has played during COVID. And then we'll just look at communication in general. So just some lessons that you can take away, and hopefully some lessons you can take away back to your own trust and school and put into practice. We'll have a look at the future. And what I want to look at there is how changes that have been made during COVID can be taken forward and can be used as we move forward, and will change the way that you guys should be communicating with different stakeholders. And then, as I say, a good Q&A section at the end. Okay, so Blue Apple Education. Just tell you a little bit about who we are. We're a creative design company. We work entirely within education. So those of you I've chatted with before will know, because I've been talking a lot about it recently, that we're 20 years old. In fact, 20 years old last week. And all of our clients are within education, schools and colleges, etc. And there are two things that are fundamental to the way that we work with schools. The first one of those we call unearthing the remarkable. And it's essentially a process that we go through whenever we start a relationship with a school. And it essentially means a process of learning about that school or trust. What makes that school tick? What makes them unique? What makes them stand out? What makes them different? And that understanding helps us explain to them the best way that they can communicate to their stakeholders. And the second thing that is really fundamental to everything that we do is producing results. And it's something that I'm very, very keen on. We've just seen Chris's explanation of the financial state. And I saw some comments, Liz Reimer, for example, you mentioned obviously issues with loss of income, no lettings happening at the moment, increased costs due to COVID. We know throughout schools that financial pressures have been great even before COVID, and since COVID they're going to be even worse. So it's really important that when you are marketing, communicating, and presenting the school, that you do that in as cost-effective way as possible. And we really want to look at making helping you do that. And if you can do it for no cost, then that's even better. We also have a network of education experts. As I say, we've been doing this for 20 years. So if there's something that you're unsure about, or that you need some advice with, there are only certain things that we provide as a supplier, but chances are we know somebody that can do that, and we can recommend and put you in contact with people that can help. Been doing lots of that during COVID. Schools really reaching out, unsure of lots of things, unsure of how to make that change over to a digital world quite often. So just getting people together and getting people talking has been really, really powerful and has helped lots of our school clients. And as I say, we're here to help. That's really the key to what we do. So if we just look at what communication has looked like over the last few months during COVID, it's true to say that great communication is fundamental to every school. And that became very apparent during COVID. And schools that already had control over their identities and the way that they communicate were able to respond to COVID a lot easier than perhaps some schools that were struggling with that already. And what I'd like to talk about today is the way that actually a school website should play a key pivotal role in the way that you communicate. Now, there are obviously lots and lots and lots of different ways that a school can communicate. But this will become a bit clearer as we move on, that your website becomes that central focus. And there's quite a few reasons why we would do that. I wanted to bring up this statement. This is something that you will come across if ever you're involved in learning about communication. It's a quote by George Bernard Shaw. Single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And essentially what we're talking about there is the fact that you have said something does not necessarily mean that that has been communicated, because we don't know if what you've said has been received, we don't know if it's been understood, and we don't know if the receiver has any questions or needs to question the element of what it is that you're talking about. And that becomes quite apparent if you think about those traditional newsletters that schools have sent out in the past. So a newsletter perhaps created once a week, sometimes once a month, once a term, printed onto an A4 sheet of paper, straight to the satchel of the child, and then taken home. And I certainly have experience as a parent of finding those newsletters weeks later crumpled in a ball at the bottom of my daughter's school bag. And schools saying, you know, oh, we've told parents over and over again in the newsletter, and there's obviously a disconnect there. And there are messages that parents aren't even receiving often, but perhaps aren't understanding or aren't buying into. And even if parents have seen the message, have they understood it, and do they have any questions? Now, those issues became really apparent during COVID, and COVID highlighted the real need for schools to have an effective feedback loop, to make sure that when they say something, they can be sure that what they've said has been understood, and that they can answer any questions that are raised from that. What I want to mention is I saw lots and lots of schools that were really struggling, you know, through the middle of the COVID crisis, because they were constantly fighting fires. They hadn't managed to strike first. They hadn't managed to step back, provide information in a way that parents were able to access it as and when they wanted it, and were constantly. The feedback I got from lots of schools was, you know, we're answering the same questions over and over again. Despite the fact that we feel like we've answered that question, we keep getting parents asking the same sorts of things. So it's looking at how you gain control of that. Really true during COVID, obviously, because, you know, there's an area and there's a period of time where parents were just very unsure what was going on. Parents needed assurances and needed to know how the school was responding in so many different ways. But this is true moving forward. This is true whenever you are communicating to your parents. And actually, you don't really ever want to be fighting fires. You want to be providing information that they can access, and they can access in their own time, that they can understand, and that you can then be assured that they've understood. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the different ways that schools communicate, so that we can gain an understanding of how we gain control of that. So if you think about the different methods by which your schools, your trusts are communicating, and obviously communicating with lots of different stakeholders, and we will take a look at that in a little while as well. Then there used to be, you know, a limited number of ways that a school could communicate. There are now really almost an infinite number of ways that you can communicate with people, and the obvious ones being email and text, which it would seem to be prevalent amongst most schools. School newsletters, and they have very often now become digital newsletters. So again, they may well actually be distributed through the email system or displayed on your website. Social media channels, your school website, and now lots of schools adopting specific apps and apps that are designed to communicate very different things in different ways to parents, and might be very specific to one area of the school. Your school prospectus and adverts that you have in the local press, we really could go on with that list, couldn't we? But you're also thinking about those face-to-face interactions that you have with parents, events that you hold in the school, your vision and your ethos, the attitude and approach that the school has to each and everything that it does, the design styles that they use. So really not just your website, but actually what your website looks like, what your prospectus looks like, what your logo and branding and every you know, your letterheads, what your newsletter looks like when a parent receives it, is all part of communication. The imagery that you use, and effectively your branding is a very important part of communication. And those of you who remember my talk back in February, we talked quite a lot about branding and the importance of getting some control over that to ensure that you make life as easy as possible for yourselves. During COVID, we saw some different ways of communicating, and I've spoken to lots of schools and a number of schools that adopted phone calls to parents. These tended to be really at the start of the whole process, so quite early on after lockdown, these schools decided that actually they needed to reach out to their parents, and they were going to endeavour to call every parent, have a conversation. It's a brilliant idea. It went down very, very well with parents who felt assured and felt like the school was taking the time to actually spend some time talking to them and answer their questions. Issues arose really as COVID progressed and as lockdown progressed, and that time scale and the time that that pupils had spent at home became longer and longer. It became very hard for schools to actually repeat those phone calls over and over again. So although that they'd tested things and they'd checked how parents were feeling and pupils were feeling early on in the process, the way that parents were feeling and the way that pupils were feeling 6 or 8 weeks later was very, very different. There were very, very different thought processes, and it was hard for the school to just keep making those phone calls. It's also difficult if you're going to phone parents, and this is going to be the way that you're going to present the information that you want to present, to make sure that you can be consistent. It's hard to put across a consistent message when you're talking to individual people who may react in very, very different ways. And also the fact that lots of those parents might ask the same questions, and you're going to be repeating information over and over again. They might ask different questions. So you might be chatting to a parent who has a question, and that might be relevant to lots and lots of other parents who haven't thought about it, but actually that information would be very, very useful for them. And with a number of those schools that I've spoken to, what they weren't doing was that whole thing that we've spoken about earlier, that feedback loop. They weren't getting that feedback and getting it together somehow in a way that parents could see and understand. So very often parents felt like the phone call was a lovely gesture on the part of the school, but then they heard nothing after that. They didn't have any feedback coming back to them. They didn't know, and sometimes they didn't get the answers that they needed to their questions, which is again another issue. Something else that we saw, Zoom calls, and putting together focus groups and having Zoom calls. And that whole communication by video chat, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet, there's a whole host, and we're using a different one today. Lots and lots of people, lots and lots of parents that perhaps hadn't heard of that functionality and just weren't used to it, now become very, very efficient on it and very, very comfortable using it. They're using it all of the time to talk to their friends and family. And that becomes a very powerful tool for schools moving forward. So I've seen some really effective focus groups that have been hosted on Zoom. Lots and lots of questions asked by the people on those focus groups, and then the schools have managed to pull that information together, to pull those questions together, provide answers to them, and then feed those answers back out to their parent body, to their staff, to everybody that's involved in that particular focus group. So really, really powerful. So how do you ensure consistent information across all channels? And this is something that we've been challenged with as a business. Lots of our schools asking us the best way to go about doing this. And as I mentioned at the top end, I think the best way to do it and the most effective way is to point everything back to your website. Now, that's not to say that your website becomes the only way that you communicate with any particular group of people, any particular group of stakeholders. But actually, whenever you communicate, you can use those different vehicles, that different methodology that we've talked about, your social media channels and text and emails, to bring parents' attention to the fact that there is information that you're going to provide. But then actually where they go to read that information is on your website. And the reason you do that is because your website can become a place that is kept up to date. It should be really easy to update the information on your website. You're not retyping this information into lots and lots of different formats. So always hyperlink. Essentially what you're saying is we have an update on X, Y, and Z, or we've released some information about this, or we want to tell you about the success of our football team. As we move forward, some success stories, hopefully. Hyperlink that comment, that message, back to the full story on your website. And that really encourages parents to view your website as a place that they can go to get up-to-date and trusted information. And you'll find that actually engagement with your website increases. That makes it much easier to then post information on your website and know that parents are actually going to see that. I've seen some really effective communication come out of schools and hosted on websites and different formats that's actually been video content. And quite often as simple as a talking head, somebody videoing themselves and just chatting, pretty much the way I suppose that I'm doing today. But it's been done regularly. There's been some great stuff that's come out from a couple of head teachers that I follow on social media, and I can share the links a little bit later on so you can take a look at those. But really just reassuring parents, talking to them about what's going on, a little bit of humour in there. I've seen some great video content actually within the communications that schools have had with their pupils. My daughter goes to a secondary school, and a lot of the provision has been quite flat. It's been quite hard for the school really to reach out to so many pupils and engage with all of those pupils. But one teacher in particular who's done it very, very well is my daughter's maths teacher, who's presented his lessons via video call. He's introduced his pupils to his dog Benji, so he's adding that humorous element, and it's become a very powerful way. In fact, my daughter now looks forward to that particular task that she gets sent through her VLE, because she knows there's going to be a little bit of interaction. It's going to be a little bit different to just a list of things that she's being asked to do by a parent. Most importantly is your website becomes a place that you can draw together all of those questions that are coming in from lots and lots of different angles, and you can post them on the website in a Q&A section. And in your Q&A section, it's always available. It's there all of the time. It's there at 11 o'clock at night when the parent thinks of something and they're unsure about the answer to it. They can go to your Q&A section and hopefully they get an answer. Okay. Your website really then becomes this central point of trusted information. The one thing that happened during COVID that where you're probably aware of and that you've seen in the press is social media in particular just became a place where lots and lots of rumor and fake news often was being shared and put across. It's an easy place to do that. So actually parents started looking for information that they could trust, and actually as a school it's a very, very powerful relationship that you can develop with your parents if you become that trusted point of information, and not just about what's going on in school. You know, you can help parents to understand what's going on in the wider world sometimes. You may be actually the only point of communication that parents can trust. Certainly in some inner city schools that I've dealt with, parents really struggling with English as a second language, and the school really becomes a crux for them and a place that they can go to and get the information that they need. And it might really have nothing to do with the education of their children. And just quickly talk about the rule of 7. This is something that I've come across many, many times in my working life. It's actually fundamental to sales and to marketing and to communications, and it's been around for centuries. We could talk about it a lot, but essentially what it talks about is that somebody will engage, or a person will engage with your message and what you're trying to say when they've seen it or they've been exposed to it 7 times. So again, thinking that simply saying something works in terms of communications isn't necessarily true. And this is the reason why commercial companies will reach out to you on their social media. They'll try and email you. They'll try adverts on televisions and on the radio. You'll see lots and lots of different ways to communicate with you, because they need to get their message in front of you 7 times on average before you will actually engage with them. And they'll be clever in the way that they actually communicate with you, depending on where they think you are in that whole transition from not knowing them to slowly onboarding, slowly getting to know them, slowly getting to trust them, and then engaging with them. And the reason that that's important for schools is you have your vision and your ethos, you have your brand identity. And what's really important and is that becomes powerful, and that it's something that parents engage with, because then you become the place where parents can get trusted information. That's when your relationship with parents becomes really powerful. Those of you who were at my chat in February will know that this is my favorite question in the world. Lots of people get bored of me asking this question, but I wanted to bring it out again today. Firstly, to remind any of you that I asked this question in the first place, and secondly, for those of you that have not seen it, this is a very, very important question to ask yourselves and to take away and ask within your school, to ask as many people as you can, as many stakeholders to your school and stakeholder groups, what is it that they value in the school? So you might have your vision and ethos, but with lots of schools that I deal with, that vision and ethos isn't actually reflecting what parents, for example, value in their school. And that is a very, very important understanding. If you can understand what people value, then your communication can actually reflect that in a much better way. Appearances really matter. And again, this is something that I talk a lot about, but very, very quickly, I just wanted to bring up this example of a website that looks like hundreds and hundreds of other websites that you'll find on the internet. And it's all about, there's nothing specifically wrong with this website. Somebody spent some time creating this, and it's there to provide information to parents. But actually, if you consider who they're talking to and who their stakeholder groups are, actually it looks like it's targeted at children. It looks like it's targeted at a younger age group, and it's not actually communicating with parents and communicating with adults. It's very, very simple to say that, but actually that's really, really important. It's very important that you look to engage with parents. This is another example of a school, and the reason I bring this up is that this school actually invested in this website, and actually there is nothing at all wrong with the structure and the system that they've adopted. It's really just in the delivery of the communication within that framework of a website. Because if you look at this homepage, it's actually not saying anything to us. We don't really know anything about this school other than it has some outdoor space and what looks to be a reasonably new building. But we don't know what people value in Newhay Community Primary School. We don't know why people would want to engage with the school, why they might want to send their children to the school. And if you compare that to a school that has grabbed a handle on that, so it's really thought about the imagery that it's going to show. So again, very, very similar. I know the layout looks a little bit different, but there's nothing really greatly different between this and the previous website homepage we were looking at, other than they've taken the time to think about what they actually want to communicate when somebody arrives on this website. And there is this really carefully chosen image of the head teacher engaged with pupils, and he's engaged in a very specific way there. He's outside and they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves, and they've got this whole stay curious message. And actually, when I read this as a parent, I'm immediately intrigued. Children are at their most successful when their imagination is stimulated. Read more, stay curious. I want to read more about that. I want to learn about this school. And if we compare that again with the previous website, they're just not communicating in this forum that they've already got. Okay, what that allows you to do as a school, once you've got control of that, once you understand what it is that you're trying to say and what's important, so what is remarkable, and again, I encourage you to go and ask that question. Ask it within school, ask it within to your parents, ask it to your pupils. Find out what that key is, what that element is. It then allows you to carry that on in all of the different ways that you communicate. So, for example, this is just an image of that school's prospectus. And again, very, very similar messaging, and the whole thing really ties nicely together. So from a communication point of view, as a trusted place that I could go for information, all of a sudden I know lots about this school's character. I'm starting to trust them because I'm buying into the way that they communicate and the way that they talk. Okay, I just want to talk about who you actually talk to. So we've talked a lot about different stakeholder groups. So essentially parents, students, teachers, and the community, but actually breaking that down a little bit, because if you consider those parents, students, and teachers, actually they're not all the same. You consider parents, you've got your current parent base, and you've then got prospective parents that are perhaps considering sending their children to your school, future parents that in sometime in the future may decide to have children and send their children to your school. So the reason I bring that up is there are two fundamental things in communication that are going to be very, very important for you guys to understand to make your communication effective. And actually, lots of schools have a bit of a handle on this. It can be quite obvious, but it's very, very powerful. So segmentation and targeting, again, something that is used in marketing and communication by professional organizations all of the time. So it's recognizing by segmenting off your market, your audience. It's understanding who those people are so that you can target specific messaging to them. So your current parents and your future parents might actually need the same information presenting to them, but you might want to present it in slightly different ways. And perhaps more importantly, you're likely to want those groups to do slightly different things once they've received that information. So telling a piece of information to your current parents is one thing. Telling it to future parents is a different thing, because you want your current parents to act in a different way to your future parents. You might want them to connect with you and communicate back to you in different ways. So understanding where that segmentation occurs is really important in deciding how you talk to those groups of people. It brings us on to, again, another lesson from COVID, which is that the pressure on head teachers and chair of governors right at the start of COVID was huge from a communication point of view. And an enormous amount of communication that I was seeing was coming from head teachers, coming directly from head teachers, or coming from chairs of governors of schools. And that became a huge pressure, and obviously very often it wasn't something that they could sustain, and they were slowly but surely trying to bring other members of staff on board that parents felt they had the same level of trust with. There was a reason why the head teacher was starting in the first place, because they're in a position of trust, and parents are going to trust what they say. What's important, again, brings us back to websites, is making sure that you've actually got systems, a website or other ways that you communicate, that can actually be updated really, really simply. What's nice about this is if you expand your communications team, if you think it's not going to just be the head teacher that communicates to our parent body, for example, you can actually provide experience to heads of department that is invaluable if they're looking to move into an SLT position. Then actually gaining some experience of communication with a parent group is really, really important, and it's brilliant from a CPD point of view. So we know who you're talking to. So now what is it that you're actually going to say? During COVID, it was really important actually that you're stating facts, not trying to be too clever, just being really, really clear and simple in the message that you were putting across. And most importantly, being honest, explaining that if you don't know the answer to something, that you would find out, and explaining to people when you would find that answer. Some things, some lessons that we can learn, for example, by the way the government was communicating during COVID. And I know I'm on shaky ground saying this, but actually some of the things that they did really, really well was that communicating at a regular time. And I know that went down actually really quite well with the public for a period anyway, in that we all knew that if we went and turned the television on at a certain time in the afternoon, they would be holding their press conference. They actually had some really great communicators during those press conferences that came across very well. And actually, there was a certain level of trust, because they weren't just politicians. They were bringing other people in to talk about things. The fact that it was at a regular time was really important. People knew it was going to be there, and people knew that I can get my information then, and I don't really need to worry about it. So again, that's just something that we can think of from a school point of view, is that if we communicate at a regular time each week, for example, parents will come to expect that communication. They may well hold off some of those annoying questions that you get, not always, during the week, but they may well hold off, knowing that actually chances are that's going to be answered, because we get this briefing every week from the school. We understand that that's when the information is released. So if we think about what's next, it's really important to recognise something that the whole of industry is recognising at the moment, and that is that digital behaviours that have been adopted by everybody during the COVID crisis have become habits now, and they are things that people are going to become much more comfortable with beyond when COVID has all hopefully has disappeared and has ended. There has been a sea change in the way that people interact with each other. The adoption of digital technology. I read something over the weekend, and it suggested really we've cut about 3 or 4 years off the adoption levels of technology. simply by the necessity of communicating during COVID. That's really important for schools to understand. And what's important there is that parents have changed perceptions about the way that you should communicate with them. They have changed in the way that they want to receive information. And to be fair, they're going to be more demanding that information is more readily available and is in those digital formats. One thing that we're now getting really involved with, and we've got lots of plans with different schools for September to get these together, is virtual open days. So schools recognizing that there's not a great deal of clarity over whether you're going to be able to have open days. Certainly, open days are going to become more difficult to host. And so schools are looking for different ways that they can engage with those prospective parents, those future parents in their school. And so virtual open days are becoming a really important development for schools, and something that we're really getting involved with now. So the idea here is that a parent can visit your website and actually attend an open day anytime. And that's really powerful if you think that a parent could effectively get the same, or as close as we can possibly get to the same experience of attending your school, but sat at home after work, late in the evening, at a time that suits them, at a time where they feel like they can engage with you and they can look at this. They can access the information online. And we're talking specifically about an area on your website that is put aside to this. So it's not alienating your existing parent base, and it's not taking space away from the information that you need to give. It's a very specific area on your website that provides prospective parents with video content, interviews with the head teacher, tours around the school, interactions with pupils. So effectively, it's like visiting the school. It's giving somebody the sense of what life in your school is like, but then also providing, and this is really important, and this is something that actually is very often missed in lots of open days that we've witnessed in schools, is providing that admissions information and feeding the admissions process in your school. So I quite often see open days that are hosted by schools, and people attend and then people leave. And there's no collection of data. And if there is a collection of data, then there's not a great follow-up of that information. And very rarely are there questions posed to those parents. How did you find it? Have you got any questions? Will you be choosing us as your first choice school? So that the school is getting a good sense of who's engaged with them, who's considering them. Obviously very important for any schools that are struggling from an admissions point of view and struggling in numbers. In my previous presentation in February, we briefly looked at the effect that just 5 pupils missing from your admissions can have financially on the school, as those group of pupils move throughout the school, the huge financial impact that can have. So these virtual open days are designed to actually grab hold of parents and feed that admissions information, to provide you with the information to who these people are, and then provide feedback on what they're thinking. Effectively, what you're looking to do is to develop long-term relationships with all of your stakeholders, and your communications to reflect your brand. So effectively, your communications to reflect that remarkable. What is remarkable in your school? When you understand that, every way that you communicate and every time that you communicate with somebody should be reflecting that brand. See if I can just get control back. There we go. Okay, so what next? Well, effectively, we're here to help. I've spent lots and lots of time throughout COVID really fielding calls and taking calls from schools with lots and lots of different concerns, sometimes just worried about the best way to communicate with parents, etc. So we're here to answer those questions. We are a commercial organisation. My job is to sell our marketing services. We provide websites and prospectuses and videos and photography and all of the things that you would expect us to provide to schools. But really, over the last few months, it's been very consultative. It's really just us being here to help in any way that we can, really. The key is to plan ahead, to think about how you're going to want to communicate moving forward. Make sure you do that in as efficient a way as you possibly can, and efficiency in terms of the time it takes you, but also financially. You very often have website formats that could be utilized. We don't need to be your website supplier, for example, to create those landing pages and those virtual open days. We can do that regardless. You can maintain your existing website. It all looks like it's part of the same thing. But it's a really cost-effective way. So it's not completely revamping a website. It's just adding this functionality that could really, really work moving forward. Okay, so that was what I wanted to cover today. I hope you found that useful. As I say, I will now stick around and answer any questions that you might have. And what I will provide everybody with some further information as to how to contact me and how to engage and perhaps get access to my calendar if you'd like me to engage with you on a video chat and answer any questions that you've got. Thanks very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for that, Mark. Just in terms of questions, there have been a couple that have come through whilst the speakers have been talking. If anyone, just a reminder, if anyone does have any questions they'd like to raise with Chris or Mark, then please put them in the chat box. I'll just cover off the couple that have come through as the presentations have been running. The first is linked to the accounting officer and a bit of a flip on, I think, on the change in the handbook this year, in that if a trust is closing on the 31st of August and then the accounting officer of that trust is going to become the accounting officer of the trust that is joining, are there any issues with that? Personal view on that is that there wouldn't be, although something to think about would be for that accounting officer, they would then, just due to that switchover date, they would then be the accounting officer at the point the larger trust's accounts would be signed in November or December. So it may be, if there is going to be a transition between accounting officer there, that maybe the 1st of January as opposed to the 1st of September might be a better date to do that. I suspect that's quite a specific example, and yeah, not a lot of people will come across that. The second question that has come through is in relation to loss of income, in particular no lettings and obviously increased costs, and how the ESFA are going to cope with that. I'm sure you'll all have seen the funding that is available for additional costs in relation to COVID-19, but there's one rather significant caveat on that, in that there can't be an in-year surplus for trusts to be able to or schools to be able to claim those costs, which will prevent a number claiming. In terms of the state of budgets going forward, unfortunately, I'm not aware of any plans that the government have in terms of funding going forward. I think we're all waiting to hear what that might look like in the future. Chris, I don't know if you've got anything extra that you'd like to add on that point.
Probably the only thing I'd add on to that is we've had a number of pre-year-end meetings of late, and what I've been finding is that the primary schools, usually because of infant free school meals and the like, have not lost significant income. And if anything, they've probably won out slightly by the fact of some of their educational costs have not been coming through. So what we've had for the primaries is probably that they're looking like may have better results, financial results at least, as a result of what's happened. It's the secondary schools which have got substantial income coming through from lettings or catering, whereby they haven't got the pupil premium money coming through or the like to actually cover off the meals. And in that case, although staff have been furloughed, there's still been a requirement on the catering side to retain some staff there to deal with the key workers and the smaller classes which you've got coming through the school. But in effect, the loss of income around lettings and catering far outweighs any savings, and those are where we're finding that there's a bit of an issue going forward with managing those budgets, because in effect those trusts have gone out and done what the department wanted them to do, which is try and generate additional income streams. They've done that, and now that we've had the situation we've got, obviously those income streams have sort of dried up, so not great from that perspective.
Thanks, Chris. Don't seem to have had any other questions coming through. Obviously, as Chris said earlier, if you want to email a question direct to one of us outside of this webinar, then happy to answer questions there. Probably just leaves for me to say thanks to Chris and Mark for providing the presentations today, and thank you to all of you for attending. Yeah, hopefully people have found it useful. Well, I have just noticed that one question has just popped up just as I was about to close there. Sorry. So, do we have any additional information about the announcement around grants for energy efficiency? I don't, Chris. I don't know if you know anything more about that.
I've not seen anything at the moment, but there is due to be I think a flurry of further announcements coming out. So I suspect that will be covered in amongst all that lot. I think it'll be a question of trying to find the information when it does come out. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, like I say, thanks to everyone for attending. Hopefully it's been useful. And I think the plan is that slides and a recording of this will be or a link to those will be sent around afterwards, so that you can gain access and have another look, or share with colleagues who maybe weren't able to attend. And I think on that, I say thank you everyone, and have a good remainder of the day.